The lights dimmed at Madison Square Garden, and 20,000 people held their breath. What happened next would become the most spontaneous moment in Michael Jackson's career, but nobody, not even Michael himself, saw it coming. It was March 3rd, 1988, and the Bad World Tour had arrived in New York City. Michael Jackson was at the absolute peak of his powers. The album Bad had already produced 5 number 1 hits, and tonight's show at Madison Square Garden was completely sold out within 17 minutes of tickets going on sale. But this wasn't just another concert. This was New York City, and New Yorkers brought an energy that even Michael had never experienced before. The anticipation had been building all day. Outside Madison Square Garden, fans had been lining up since 6 a.m., even though doors wouldn't open until 7 p.m. The streets around Penn Station were packed with Michael Jackson fans from all 5 boroughs, many wearing homemade sequined gloves and practicing moonwalk moves on the sidewalk. Street vendors were selling bootleg Michael Jackson t-shirts, and someone had set up a boombox playing Thriller on repeat. The energy was infectious, electric, and completely unique to New York City. Inside the venue, the production crew was amazed by what they were seeing. "I've been setting up concerts for 20 years, said Tommy Martinez, the head of MSG's technical crew. "And I've never seen fans this excited before the show even started. They were screaming just watching us do the sound check." The buzz in the building was palpable hours before Michael would take the stage. Michael himself was feeling the New York energy from his dressing room. "You can hear them through the wall," he told his longtime friend and choreographer, Vincent Patterson. "It's like the whole building is humming with excitement." Michael had performed at Madison Square Garden before, but never during the peak of his global superstardom, and never with an audience this electric. From the moment Michael stepped onto that iconic MSG stage, wearing his legendary black leather jacket with silver buckles, the crowd was electric. The opening notes of "Wanna Be Startin' Somethin'" sent waves of screaming fans into a frenzy that could be heard 3 blocks away in Midtown Manhattan. But Michael had no idea that by the time Billie Jean started, he would make a decision that would shock his security team, terrify his management, and create a moment that would be talked about for decades. "New York City," Michael called out after finishing "The Way You Make Me Feel," his voice echoing through the garden's rafters. "I can feel your energy tonight." The response was deafening. 20,000 voices screaming back at him, with a love and passion that seemed to physically lift the roof off the building. Michael felt something he'd never experienced before. The intoxicating pull of a crowd that wasn't just watching him, but connecting with him on a level that transcended performance. But what Michael didn't know was that the real magic was yet to come. As the band began the distinctive bass line for Billie Jean, something shifted in the atmosphere. This wasn't just Michael's biggest hit. This was the song that had broken racial barriers on MTV, the song that had made him a global superstar, the song that every single person in Madison Square Garden knew by heart. The crowd recognized those opening notes instantly, and the roar that erupted was unlike anything the venue had ever heard. Michael began moving to the rhythm, his body responding to the music with that supernatural grace that had made him the king of pop. He glided across the stage effortlessly, each step perfectly timed to the beat. The crowd was mesmerized, swaying in perfect unison to the rhythm. But as Michael reached the first verse, he noticed something that would change everything. The entire floor of Madison Square Garden was moving. Not just swaying, moving like a living, breathing entity. 20,000 people had become one organism, pulsing with the same rhythm, breathing with the same beat. The energy wasn't just coming from the stage anymore. It was being generated by the crowd itself and bouncing back to Michael in waves so powerful he could feel them in his chest. "Billie Jean is not my lover," Michael sang, pointing directly into the crowd during the famous line. But instead of the usual screaming response, something incredible happened. The entire garden sang the next line back to him in perfect unison. "She's just a girl who claims that I am the one." 20,000 voices became one voice, and that voice was so pure, so powerful, that Michael stopped mid-step and just listened. For 5 seconds, Michael Jackson stood completely still on the Madison Square Garden stage, overwhelmed by the sound of 20,000 people singing his song back to him with such passion that it gave him chills. The band kept playing, but Michael was frozen, experiencing something he'd never felt before: complete and total connection with his audience. But that was just the beginning of the magic. As the song moved into the second verse, the energy in the garden began to build even higher. Michael could feel it like electricity running through his body. Every time he moved, the crowd responded. Every time he spun, they cheered louder. Every time he gestured, they reached toward him like they were trying to touch something sacred. The connection between performer and audience was so intense that Michael began to lose himself in it. "Billie Jean is not my lover," he sang again. But this time his voice was different. This time it carried all the energy and love he was receiving from the crowd and sent it right back to them, amplified. The crowd felt it immediately, and their response was explosive. The floor of Madison Square Garden was now moving so violently that security guards were looking around nervously, unsure if the building could handle the vibrations. Then came the moment that would change everything: the moonwalk. As the song reached its instrumental break, Michael moved to center stage for his signature move. The crowd knew what was coming, and the anticipation was electric. The spotlight narrowed to a single beam of white light, and Michael Jackson prepared to moonwalk across the Madison Square Garden stage. But as he began that impossible glide backwards across the stage, something happened that had never happened before. The crowd's energy reached a level that was almost visible. The screaming wasn't just loud anymore. It was a physical force that seemed to lift Michael off the ground. As he moonwalked, the garden shook, not from the sound, but from 20,000 people jumping, dancing, and moving with such intensity that the entire building was vibrating. Michael felt that energy hit him like a wave, and for the first time in his professional career, he lost control. Not of his performance, not of his voice, but of his overwhelming need to be closer to that incredible energy source. The pull was magnetic, irresistible, and completely spontaneous. What happened next shocked everyone, including Michael himself. As the moonwalk ended and Michael reached the edge of the stage, he didn't turn back toward the center like he always did. Instead, he looked down at the crowd just 10 feet below him, and he saw something that took his breath away. 20,000 faces looking up at him with pure love, pure joy, pure connection. And in that moment, Michael Jackson made a decision that went against every security protocol, every performance plan, every logical thought in his head. He jumped. Not a planned jump, not a choreographed move, but a spontaneous leap of pure emotion and energy. Michael Jackson launched himself off the Madison Square Garden stage directly into the crowd of 20,000 people, trusting completely that they would catch him. And they did. But in those first few seconds of free fall, chaos erupted backstage. Jerry Williams, Michael's head of security, was watching from the side of the stage when it happened. "I saw Michael approach the edge, and I thought he was just going to point at the crowd like he always did," Jerry recalled years later. "Then he just flew. My heart stopped. 20 years of keeping performers safe, and I'd never seen anything like it." Security radios crackled to life immediately. "Code red! Code red! The principal is in the crowd!" Jerry barked into his headset while running toward the edge of the stage. But as he looked down at what was happening below, he stopped dead in his tracks. The crowd wasn't attacking Michael or trying to grab pieces of his clothing. Instead, hundreds of hands had formed a human safety net, gently catching and supporting him like he was floating on a cloud. "It was the most beautiful thing I'd ever seen," said Maria Santos, a 23-year-old nursing student from Queens who was in the third row that night. "Michael fell right toward our section, and everyone just instinctively reached up to catch him. Nobody grabbed his hair or tried to take his glove. We all just wanted to make sure he was safe." What happened in the next 30 seconds became the most legendary moment in Madison Square Garden history. As Michael fell toward the crowd, hundreds of hands reached up to catch him. Not grab him, not pull at him, but catch him gently and support him like he was floating on air. The king of pop was literally being held up by his fans, and the connection was so pure, so perfect, that even the security guards who were rushing to extract him stopped and stared in amazement. But here's where the story gets even more incredible. Michael didn't want to be rescued. As his security team pushed through the crowd trying to reach him, Michael was having the time of his life. Supported by dozens of hands, he continued singing Billie Jean, while being passed gently through the crowd like he was crowd surfing at a rock concert. His voice never wavered, his rhythm never broke, and his connection with the audience reached a level that transcended anything anyone in that building had ever experienced. "She told my baby we'd dance till 3, Michael sang while floating on a sea of hands, his voice carrying perfectly through his wireless microphone. The crowd was singing along, but they were also crying, laughing, and experiencing something that felt more like a religious experience than a concert. Security guards were running alongside the crowd, trying to keep up with Michael as he was gently passed from the section to section. Frank DeLeo, Michael's manager, was watching from the side of the stage with his mouth hanging open. In 30 years of managing performers, he had never seen anything like this. His first instinct was to rush down and extract Michael immediately. But as he watched the gentle, loving way the crowd was treating Michael and saw the pure joy on the performer's face, he realized something. This wasn't dangerous. This was magical. "Don't interfere," Frank said quietly to the security team through his headset. "Let it happen." Michael continued moving through the crowd, still singing, still connecting, still experiencing the most spontaneous and beautiful moment of his career. The crowd was passing him back toward the stage slowly, lovingly, making sure he was safe every step of the way. But nobody wanted this moment to end. Not Michael, not the crowd, not even the security team that had initially been terrified. David Chen, a 19-year-old college student from Manhattan, found himself holding Michael's left shoulder as he was passed through the crowd. He was so light, almost weightless, David remembered decades later. But what I remember most was his eyes. He was looking at each of us individually, making eye contact, smiling. It wasn't scary for him at all. He was having the time of his life. Meanwhile, in the upper levels of Madison Square Garden, fans who couldn't see exactly what was happening were straining to understand why the music was continuing, but Michael wasn't visible on stage. We could hear Billie Jean playing and Michael singing, but he wasn't on stage, said Jennifer Rodriguez, who was sitting in the 200 level. Then someone with binoculars started screaming that Michael was in the crowd, and the whole upper deck went crazy trying to see. The venue staff was experiencing their own shock. Robert Kelly, who worked in MSG's operations department, was monitoring the show from the control room. "Our building's safety sensors were going off because the floor was vibrating so intensely," he said. "We'd never seen crowd movement like that. The entire floor was pulsing with the rhythm of the song, and then when Michael jumped, it was like an earthquake of excitement." As Billie Jean reached its final verse, Michael found himself about 20 feet from the stage, still supported by the crowd, still singing with a joy and freedom he'd never experienced before. "Billie Jean is not my lover," he sang one final time. And 20,000 people sang it back to him while holding him in their arms like he was their own child. When the song ended, something beautiful happened. The crowd gently, slowly, carefully passed Michael back to the front of the stage where his security team was waiting to help him back up. There was no grabbing, no fighting, no chaos, just 20,000 people working together to make sure their hero got back safely to where he belonged. As Michael was lifted back onto the stage, the applause that erupted was unlike anything Madison Square Garden had ever heard. It wasn't just applause for a great performance. It was applause for a moment of pure human connection, for 30 seconds where the barrier between performer and audience had completely disappeared. Michael stood at the edge of the stage, looking out at the crowd that had just held him, supported him, and loved him in the most literal way possible. Tears were streaming down his face, but he was smiling the biggest smile anyone had ever seen. He grabbed the microphone and tried to speak, but his voice was choked with emotion. "New York," he finally managed to say, "that was the most beautiful thing that has ever happened to me." The crowd erupted again, but this time it was different. This time it was the sound of 20,000 people who had just shared something sacred with their idol. They had held Michael Jackson in their hands and returned him safely to the stage, and the trust and love involved in that exchange had created a bond that would last forever. But the impact of that moment went far beyond that single night at Madison Square Garden. Word of Michael's spontaneous crowd dive spread through New York City within hours. By the next morning, every newspaper in the city was carrying the story. "Michael Jackson trusts NYC crowd with his life," read the headline in the New York Daily News. The New York Times ran an editorial about the moment, calling it a perfect example of the connection between artist and audience that makes live performance irreplaceable. But the story spread far beyond New York. Within 48 hours, footage shot by amateur videographers in the crowd had made its way to MTV, where it played in heavy rotation for weeks. "I've never seen anything like it," said Nina Blackwood, one of MTV's original VJs. "Usually when we show concert footage, it's the performer on stage. But this video was entirely shot from the crowd's perspective, showing Michael being passed from hand to hand like he was crowd surfing at a punk rock show. It completely changed how I thought about pop concerts." The footage also caught the attention of other major performers. Madonna, who was working on her Who's That Girl tour at the time, called Michael personally to ask about the experience. "She wanted to know if I planned it or if it really was spontaneous," Michael told his friend Quincy Jones. "When I told her it just happened in the moment, she said it was the most punk rock thing she'd ever seen a pop star do." Bruce Springsteen, known for his own connection with audiences, was reportedly amazed by the video. "That's what it's all about," he told Rolling Stone magazine. "That moment when the barrier between performer and audience completely disappears. Most of us spend our careers trying to create that feeling, and Michael just fell into it accidentally." The incident also sparked conversations about concert security and crowd safety. Industry publications ran articles analyzing how the moment was possible without injury, leading to studies about crowd behavior and the psychology of collective action. The Michael Jackson incident, as it became known in security circles, was used as a case study in how properly managed crowds can actually protect rather than harm performers. But the real impact was on Michael himself. That night changed how he thought about performing, about his relationship with his fans, and about the power of spontaneous human connection. From that night forward, Michael began incorporating more spontaneous moments into his performances, always looking for ways to break down the barrier between himself and his audience. Karen Fay, Michael's longtime makeup artist and friend, noticed the change immediately. "After that night at Madison Square Garden, Michael was different," she recalled years later. "He talked constantly about how it felt to be held by the crowd, how pure and loving it was. He said it reminded him why he became a performer in the first place, not for the fame or the money, but for those moments of connection." The crowd surfing moment at MSG also inspired Michael's approach to his future concerts. During the Dangerous World Tour in the early 1990s, Michael began building moments into his shows where he would get closer to the audience, sometimes even stepping down into the crowd, with much more security planning than that spontaneous night in 1988. But the influence went deeper than just staging. Michael's entire relationship with his fans evolved after that night. Before Madison Square Garden, Michael always maintained a certain professional distance, observed his longtime backup singer, Sita Garrett. After that night, he started talking about fans differently. He called them "my family" instead of "the audience." That experience of being literally held by his fans changed how he saw that relationship. This shift became evident in Michael's interactions during meet and greets and fan events. Where he had once been polite but reserved, he became more open, more willing to engage in real conversations with fans. He would ask about their lives, their families, their dreams, said Bill Bottrell, who produced several of Michael's songs in the early 1990s. He said that night at MSG taught him that his fans weren't just there for the music. They genuinely cared about him as a person. The experience also influenced the design of Michael's Neverland Ranch. When planning the amusement park area, Michael specifically requested that there be spaces where he could interact with visiting children and fans without barriers. He wanted to recreate that feeling of connection, said his former bodyguard Matt Fiddes. He would often talk about how pure and loving the crowd was that night, and how he wanted to create environments where he could experience that kind of genuine human connection regularly. Even Michael's studio work was affected. During the recording sessions for Dangerous, he insisted on keeping some of the spontaneous, live energy elements that had made that MSG moment possible. He wanted the albums to capture some of that raw, spontaneous energy he felt that night, recalled engineer Bruce Swedian. He kept saying, "I want people to feel like they're holding me when they listen to this." Years later, when Michael was designing his planned This Is It concerts in London, He specifically requested that the stage design include ways for him to get closer to the audience. "I want to recreate that Madison Square Garden feeling," he told his production team. "That moment when I was floating on their love." The bootleg recording of that performance became legendary among Michael Jackson fans. The audio of Michael singing Billie Jean while crowd surfing was traded among collectors for years. And when it finally surfaced online in the early 2000s, it became one of the most shared Michael Jackson videos on the internet. Not because of the spectacle, but because you could hear the pure joy and freedom in Michael's voice. In 2009, when Madison Square Garden created a display honoring the greatest moments in the venue's history, Michael's spontaneous crowd dive was featured prominently. The display included photos from that night and a quote from Michael. "The night I learned that my fans didn't just love my music, they loved me." 20 years after that magical night, Michael returned to Madison Square Garden for the 30th anniversary celebration concerts in 2001. During the rehearsals, he walked to the exact spot on the stage where he had jumped into the crowd in 1988. "Right here," he told his security chief. "This is where everything changed for me." But the story of that night isn't just about Michael Jackson. It's about the power of spontaneous human connection in an increasingly disconnected world. In an era before social media, before everyone had cameras in their pockets, before every moment was documented and shared, 20,000 people shared something genuine and pure with their idol, and nobody tried to exploit it or turn it into content. They just experienced it, treasured it, and carried it with them forever. Many of the people who were in Madison Square Garden that night still talk about it as one of the most beautiful experiences of their lives. Not because they got to touch a celebrity, but because they got to be part of something larger than themselves. Part of a moment where love and trust triumphed over fear and cynicism. Michael Jackson's spontaneous leap into the crowd at Madison Square Garden on March 3, 1988, lasted exactly 47 seconds. But those 47 seconds created ripples that extended far beyond that night, influencing how Michael approached his art, how he connected with his fans, and how 20,000 people understood the power of collective love and support. Today, video of that moment is still shared millions of times across social media platforms, usually with captions like, "This is what trust looks like," or "When music truly brings people together." Because in an age where public figures are increasingly isolated from their audiences by security concerns and social media barriers, that moment represents something that feels almost impossible now: complete spontaneous trust between a performer and their fans. The security footage from that night was kept in Madison Square Garden's archives for decades. But in 2018, as part of a documentary about the venue's greatest moments, portions were finally released to the public. Watching it now, you can see the exact moment when Michael makes the decision to jump. There's no hesitation, no second guessing, just pure impulse driven by an overwhelming need to connect. Michael Jackson's spontaneous crowd dive at Madison Square Garden reminds us that sometimes the most beautiful moments in life are the ones we never plan, the ones that happen when we trust our instincts and open ourselves to connection with others. In a world that often feels divided and disconnected, that 47-second moment of pure human love and trust feels more precious than ever. The King of Pop jumped into a crowd of 20,000 people that night, but what he really did was leap into the arms of love itself. And for 47 magical seconds, everyone in Madison Square Garden got to experience what that feels like. That's not just a concert moment. That's a reminder of what's possible when we trust each other completely. If this incredible story of spontaneous connection and trust moved you, make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell for more amazing true stories about the moments that made music history. Have you ever experienced a moment of pure connection with a performer or artist? Share your story in the comments below. And don't forget to hit that like button if you believe in the power of music to bring people together in ways that nothing else can.